Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. Here I am in front of the statue of King James II in London. And it says, James II, by the grace of God, of England, Scotland, France and Ireland, King, Defender of the Faith, 1686. Well, King James II, he had only a reign of 3 years and he was overthrown. The last king of this realm to be ousted. So why was he pushed out? Well, for one sole reason, and that was his religious denomination. He was brought up an Anglican, but he converted to Roman Catholicism. His mother, Princess Henrietta Maria of France, which became queen of this country, she was a Catholic. His father, King Charles I, was an Anglican. He's brought up more of an Anglican, but as a young man he converted. Well, what about him? So he was the second son of King Charles I, and when James II was a teenager, the English Civil War broke out. Parliamentarians against royalists. Parliamentarians tended to be Puritans. That's Anglicans who were of a particularly low church bent, who were fervently Protestant, who were iconoclastic, who wanted simplicity in worship, who believed in verbal inerrancy, to worship really to be Bible-based, who wanted to be very ardently Protestant. So there's a religious element to it. There were some more high church Anglicans on the parliamentarian side who wanted more ornate worship and so on. So there was a political aspect to it as well, of course. Then on the royalist side, the people in their religious views tended to be Anglicans who were more high church, who were more ritualistic and so on. Of course, there were some low church people who happened on the royalist side. Don't want to get too sidetracked into what the English Civil War was about. But anyway, James II, he fled to the Netherlands and he lived there at Breda with his elder brother, King Charles II. Their father, Charles I, was executed in 1649. Then there was the British Republic for a few years under Oliver Cromwell. His son, Richard Cromwell, Tumbledown Dick, as he was known. And then the Duke of Albemarle, who was a royalist general who was released from prison in 1659 to rule the country. But then in 1660, the monarchy was restored. They were invited back. So James II came back with his elder brother. So James II had the title the Duke of York. The younger son of the sovereign usually has that title. Anyway, he converted to Catholicism. Now his elder brother Charles II was married to Catherine of Braganza, Portuguese princess, of course a Catholic. There was fervent anti-Catholic prejudice in this country. Charles II didn't feel it, was willing to marry a Catholic person. It was quite unpopular. Now, Charles II had 20 children, none of them with his wife. That was the trouble. He had many mistresses. His wife was barren. Anyway, James II, he married Mary of Modena, and as the name of Modena suggests, she was an Italian aristocrat, but again, she was infertile. She died, then he married Anne Hyde, the daughter of the Earl of Clarendon. With Anne Hyde, he had his daughters, Anne and Mary, well, in the opposite order actually. But anyway, I won't go into it. So he was a Catholic, he was due to inherit, but some people thought this is terrible because his brother had no legitimate children. Only those born in wedlock could inherit the crown. So in 1681, there was the Exclusion crisis, where Parliament met in Oxford and they tried to pass an act to exclude James II from the succession because of their anti-Catholic bigotry. Now, in England, the Church of England was the established church. It was a Protestant one, likewise in Scotland, the Church of Scotland, likewise in Ireland, the Church of Ireland. Thing is, of course, in Ireland, the majority of us are Catholics, but this minority church was the established one. Anyhow, Charles II refused to sign this act excluding his brother. Parliament was divided into excluders, who wanted to exclude James II, and abhorrers, those who abhorred the idea of excluding a prince of the blood royal from the line of succession. Anyway, 1685, Charles II was summoned to his reward. So James II became king. Within months he faced a rebellion. That is, the Duke of Monmouth. His nephew rebelled against him. One of Charles II's sons, who was born outside of matrimony, was the Duke of Monmouth. Because Charles II used to look after his children. The boys, he would give them noble titles. The girls, he would demand an aristocrat married them. So James II defeated the Duke of Monmouth. It got fairly far, actually. The Battle of Basingstoke, had him brought here. He pleaded for his life before his uncle, but no, he was put to death because the Duke of Monmouth didn't have a legal claim to the crown. Duke of Monmouth thought that people would prefer a Protestant who was born outside of wedlock to a Catholic who was born inside wedlock. He was mistaken. And if Monmouth had not caused this insurrection, then thousands of people would have been spared. He was put to death. But things got a bit worse because then James II's wife was delivered of a baby boy. There was the warming pan claim that this was not their real child. It was a foundling smuggled into the royal bedchamber in a warming pan that his wife hadn't parturated after all. So people thought they couldn't stand it. James II had signed the secret Treaty of Dover with Louis XIV of France. James II agreed to restore the Roman Catholic faith as the state religion here as soon as the security of his throne allowed. Well, I think that was never going to happen, and it was secretly being funded by Louis XIV. France was then La Grande Nation, was the mightiest country in Europe. The wars of the Leagues of Augsburg were about to kick off. Anyway, so people got wind of this. It was meant to be top secret Treaty of Dover. And James II was way ahead of his time, signing the Act of Toleration and the Act of Indulgence, allowing equality to Episcopalians in Scotland. Notice the Church of Scotland is properly Protestant, with no bishops or archbishops, has none of the Catholic baggage of the Church of England, and allowing, obviously, equality before law to Roman Catholics here in England, appointing Obadiah Walker, a Catholic, to Master of University College, Oxford, things like that. Generals in the army, like in Ireland, like Talbot and Sarsfield. Anyway, so then there was the invitation to William. James II was chased out, and the Immortal Seven, 5 Whigs and 2 Tories, wrote the invitation to William of Orange to come over here. He was stadtholder of the Netherlands. He was the son-in-law of James II. He was married to James II's daughter, Mary, and they came over here. That was the 1688 revolution, the Glorious Revolution, as some partisans have called it. I shan't go into it. But anyway, James II fled initially to France, latterly to Ireland. He fought the Battle of the Boyne, in which he was vanquished, and he fled to France, lived out the rest of his days there. His son and his grandson attempted to make comebacks. The old pretender, the young pretender, they were known as. So Jacobites, his supporters were called, as in Jacobus, which is James in Latin. So there's only one other statue of James II up in this country, and that one is in University College, Oxford. So James II, I have a lot of time for him. I thought he brought in religious equality. Though he was a Catholic himself, he was not prejudiced against those of other Christian denominations. For instance, he was a dear friend of William Penn, who was a Quaker, who founded Pennsylvania, meaning Penn's Woods. So I think it's a pity he didn't hang on. He might have restored the Catholic faith in this country. It wouldn't have been worse than Anglicanism, with it had its pluralism and all the rest of it. But then Ireland, we would have had the same major Christian denomination as Great Britain. Perhaps the separation never would have occurred. You see here he is in the guise of a Roman consul, if you look at his togs he's wearing. Well, that is James II.